Hey everybody, we've got Dave Rogers here and we're excited to host him here today, and he's got quite a story. So we want to figure out how he got started in all of this.
Okay, I'll tell you, and I pledge to tell the truth this time. And actually, I started writing this book about 10 years ago or more, but I didn't know I was writing a book. I was actually writing these little stories for my family. I come from a large extended family. My grandparents, grandfather, grandmother Rogers had 14 children, and there were 35 first cousins in that family. I went down to Crabtree Creek, that's where the farm was, and I spent the summer. I was 10 years old when I went down, and I was the official water boy. Of course, I had 3 uncles still at home. I had my grandfather and a hired hand, and that means 5 workers in the field that had to be hydrated every day. And so there wasn't bottled water to take out there. There wasn't ice water because they had no electricity to freeze the ice. And so I went to the spring house with a large bucket and with a dipper in it. So I got the cool water in the bucket and headed for the field and tried to get there before it warmed up too much. And so everybody drink out of the same dipper. Back in those days, that was all right. Today, people would be freaked out about that, I guess. Well, anyway, my time that summer was a real adventure. I got to go places with my grandfather. One day he said, let's go salt the cattle. I didn't know what he meant by that, but he put a big sack of salt up in front of the saddle on the horse, and I got on behind and held him around the waist, and off to the mountain place we went. He took his cattle up there for the summer because there was a lot of lush grass on that mountain. And so when we got to the bottom of the mountain, there was this huge log there, longer than this row of chairs here, and it was kind of slick and so on, and it was made that way by the cattle. And so he called the cattle, and you could hear them coming through the brush up on the mountain. They knew exactly why my grandfather was there. Animals crave salt and need salt, and so they came down and we poured the salt along the top of the log, and they licked the salt off, and that's the reason they called it a lick log. I know most of you have never heard of a lick log. After that, another time we went to that same mountain place to pick blackberries, and a lot of mountain people, that was a big thing. They preserved a lot of blackberries. They made blackberry cobblers, and of course that was my grandfather's favorite dish, blackberry cobbler, and he passed it down. It must be in the genes, in the DNA, so blackberry cobbler is a favorite of mine as well. Before the second summer came, they had no electricity, no indoor plumbing. It was like I stepped back into the previous century. Life had not changed that much. But when they got electricity before my second summer there, life changed. They got electricity to most of the farmers was a cord hanging in the center of the room with a chain to pull. And grandmother had not had a refrigerator before. And there was no place to put the refrigerator in the kitchen because it wasn't designed correctly, so we had to put the refrigerator in the dining room. And back then, they tried to make a refrigerator look like a piece of furniture, and it had curved legs. And, of course, to a 10-year-old boy, electricity meant grandmother could make me ice cream in the ice trays. They sold an ice cream powder. There were three flavors, chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. And she could put the cream, which we had plenty of, and stir the powder into it and stir it a couple of times while it was freezing. And the 10-year-old boy got some ice cream. See, we didn't have a car to go to town, and we didn't go to town very much, but I always got ice cream when I went to town, but that didn't happen very often. So it was a real adventure, and of course, if I'd known I was going to write a book about it, I would have paid better attention. But I did learn a lot. I learned from my grandfather how to graft one apple tree onto another. If he was out visiting another fellow farmer or something and saw a good apple tree, he'd break a twig off of it and take it back home and graft it onto one of his apple trees. He had a pretty substantial orchard. But it's not very often that you see apple trees with 3 or 4 or at least 2 or 3 different kind of apples on the same tree. Back to the electricity thing, I wrote about Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his bringing electricity to the farmers all over this country. They appreciated this, and they put his picture on the wall. Every farmhouse out in Crabtree Creek had a picture on the wall, and that's the name of the story in this book, The Picture on the Wall. And Bradford has put up a audio version of my story, and he even has President Roosevelt saying, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." You remember that, and I hope that was a good imitation. If not, I apologize. There's about 46 stories here in this book, and I've continued to write stories. I've written over 100 additional short stories about my life, and they're all true stories, and they're entertaining. I hope there's some humor in the book. So if any of you read the book, I hope you enjoy it and get a little humor out of it. We're going to have another book coming out pretty soon. The gentleman here to my right, Bradford, my son, is actually responsible for this book because he put up a blog site for me, and I was putting the stories on the blog site so my extended family, which are scattered all over the United States, could know something about their roots. And I'm the oldest surviving member of the Rogers clan from Crabtree. And I came to realize that I had to write this down or this would be lost forever. And I've really enjoyed doing it. And of course, some of my relatives and some of my customers were reading the blog site, and they were encouraging me to publish. I never would have got around to it unless Bradford had not taken the bull by the horns and got the book published for me. Bradford owns World Songs, which publishes music, but he made an exception and published a book. And so he's helping me get another one on the road. And I think I've told some of you about what we might call the next book. And I'm looking at my brother-in-law over there, and he's got a cap that says Hanging Dog on it. So everybody wants to know where's Hanging Dog? Well, it's pretty simple. It's just a mile down the road from Frog Level. And don't laugh at that one. That's but actually, Frog Level is a part of Waynesville. And it's down next to the creek where the frogs are, so they call it Frog Level. There are a lot of creative names in the mountains. There's one name called Bow-Legged Valley. Well, the way that this little community was named is that the builder, who happened to be a great uncle of mine, great uncle Charlie, great uncle Little Charlie. I had a big Charlie and a little Charlie. Well, anyway, he built most of the houses at Bow-Legged Valley, and he was bow-legged, so that's the way the community got its name. And there are other names like Rabbit Skin, Bearwalla, and I could go on and on. And the ancestral home for my mother was Iron Duff. Well, it was named after a gentleman, a Scottish gentleman who was well respected in the community, and his name was actually Aaron Macduff. Well, in the language of a mountaineer, and he was trying to talk to a flatlander from Raleigh who came up to establish the post office there, and what he said, it was like Iron Duff, and he just kind of went over the McDuff, and so the community was named Iron, I-R-O-N, Duff, D-U-F-F, instead of Aaron McDuff, and that was put over the post office, and they never got around to changing it. So much for unusual names. Does anyone have any questions about what I'm...
I'd like to know how far you lived from town.
How far I lived from town?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I lived at Hanging Dog, that's about a mile to town. And when I was working my way through college, I had to walk 2 miles to Hazelwood, which is a suburb now included in Waynesville. I made a deal with a gentleman who ran the summer Ralph's Market, Ralph Summerall. And I told him I needed to earn enough money to go to college, and I'd work for him for a year and a summer. And so he guaranteed me a wage that was enough to put me through 2 years of college at Mars Hill. But I stayed at home, and I didn't have a car. I walked 2 miles in the morning to Ralph Summerall's store to work there, and I walked back in the evening. I actually walked up the railroad track. I got pretty good on walking the rails. But does anyone else have a question?
How'd you meet your beautiful wife?
I was going to say in a bar, but I was afraid she'd slap me down. Well, how did I meet you? I think it was in the bar. I'll try to make up a story about that. Well, a friend of mine introduced us. So that's how I met her.
And how long have you been married? And I'll put out the questions.
31 years. 31 good years.
31 good years.
May the 29th of 2019, it'll be 32. And, well, I'll throw in something else. I'll be 90 years old on my next birthday. And, but I ain't done yet. I'm still writing, and I hope to publish at least 3 more books. Bradford is getting to work on it and going to put one together pretty soon that I have most of the material there. But he might tell me like what he told me one day when I brought a story to him, and he read it through, and he said, "Dad, I think you better take this home and work on it a little bit more." Now, how about that? Well, I have an audio version of the book, but he was real patient and teaching me to be a narrator. Is that what I am now? He told me I was a writer and made me believe it, and then he told me I was an author and made me believe it. Now I'm a narrator, but I don't hardly believe it. But actually, I've read that book, and you can hear the old man from the mountain talking to you and telling you these stories, just like I'm sitting in the living room with you. But Bradford had to teach me how to not read make it sound like I'm reading. He wanted to make it sound like conversation. And some sentences he would make me do 4, 5, or 6 times to get it right. He'd say, "Dad, try it this way." And so the whole thing worked out, and thanks to Bradford's patience. Anybody else have any question about it from the old man from the mountains, or can he go back and be a hermit? Early on, I had a hobby of fishing. I went trout fishing up in the mountains, and we had a house on Lake Lanier, and I liked to go up there just to get away from my office a little bit. I didn't care much whether I caught a fish or not. I'd go into a cove somewhere, throw out the anchor, and catch a few fish. It didn't matter. I even had a friend that he came down to the dock every time I came up in that cove. And my friend jumped in the water, and he would swim out to the boat. And, of course, I had to pull the bait in to keep from hooking him. It was actually a Labrador. So he would check me out and swim back to the shore. But every time I pulled into that cove, he would come down there and check me out. And I had other hobbies, gardening and tending flowers. I like to raise plants, and I even built a wall. One of the walls at what I call the deck house. We have 6 decks and a dock, so that's the way it got its name. I was over 70 years old, and I told Derrick, my stepson, that I was going to build that wall. I couldn't get a contractor to do it the way I wanted it. And he says, "You got to be kidding." I said, "No, I'm going to build that wall." It's about 40 feet long and about 3 or 4 feet tall. And so I built that wall myself. I never was a hunter. I don't. Actually, my brother-in-law, who's standing over there, Johnny Wayne Bradford, took me coon hunting one night. And so there was 4 or 5 guys, there were several dogs, and only one little coon. And I always pulled for the underdog. And when I told Johnny Wayne that I was pulling for the coon, he never took me coon hunting again. So that I never had that as a hobby. I did have another hobby, collecting antique tools, and they are in a trunk back at the deck house. But I have a lot of really nice antique tools, all of them which are usable. They're not broken pieces. We will put out another book fairly soon, and we may call it Up from Hanging Dog. So anyone who's born in a 3-room shack at Hanging Dog, there's only one way to go, and that's up. So we may call it Up from Hanging Dog. Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Carolyn.
My pleasure. It's been a treat.
You get him to sign it. We'll pay for it.